The Varelian world of Sarava Prime had always been quiet. From high in the snow-covered mountains to the silver-blue seas that sparkled in the sunlight, there was peace. The Varelians were a tall, graceful people with soft voices and gentle eyes. They built cities of shining crystal and bridges that sang when the wind touched them. For hundreds of years, they had lived without war. But peace can be fragile. Above their world, in the dark between the stars, a shadow was moving closer. The Draxion Empire, a cruel and relentless power, had already conquered 3 neighboring systems. They demanded resources, soldiers, and complete obedience. Those who resisted were destroyed without warning. On the southern continent, in the city of Lyraven, a council of elders met inside the Hall of Winds. The great chamber was round, with open walls that let in the mountain air. Crystal chimes hung from the ceiling, and every time the wind shifted, they sang a sad, soft note. Elder Selka, the oldest among them, stood at the center. Her long white robe moved in the breeze. "The Draxian warships have been sighted," she said quietly, her voice carrying even without force. "They will arrive in less than 20 days. The other elders exchanged worried glances. Varelians did not have weapons of war. Their patrol ships were made for mapping the seas and studying the skies, not for battle. Elder Vorn stepped forward. "We can try to speak with them," he suggested, though his tone was unsure. "Perhaps they will see reason." Selka's eyes were steady. "The Draxions do not speak of reason. They speak of ownership. They will take our people as they have taken others. You have all heard the stories." The chimes above gave a sharp, cold sound. Silence followed. At last, Selka lifted her gaze to the night sky. Through the open walls, stars glittered like frozen fire. "We have one chance," she said. "The old way." Everyone knew what she meant. Long ago, before the Varelians had learned to shape crystal or ride the windships, they had sent light messages into space, pure beams of energy carrying a single call for aid. It was an ancient tradition, passed down in songs and stories. No one truly believed it worked anymore. But in times of great need, the people still sent the signal. It was said that somewhere out in the endless dark, there were others, beings who might hear and come to help. Vorn frowned. "It is only a tale for children." Selka's voice sharpened slightly. "It is hope, and hope is what we need. That night, the citizens of Lyraven gathered on the cliffside platform where the star beacon stood. It was an enormous structure of white stone, built long before anyone could remember. Its central crystal rose into the air like a frozen flame, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The wind was strong, carrying the scent of the sea. Children clung to their parents, elders held each other's hands. Everyone stared up at the beacon. Selka stepped forward. She carried a silver staff topped with a shard of starlight crystal. Placing the staff into a small hollow at the beacon's base, she began to chant in the old tongue. The words were simple. "We ask for mercy. We ask for aid. We are not ready to fall." The crystal's glow grew brighter, sending a pulse into the sky. Then another. Then a steady stream of light shot upward, piercing the clouds and vanishing into the black beyond. High above, in the cold vacuum of space, the signal raced. Away faster than thought, leaving Sarava Prime behind. The crowd remained silent. Some felt comforted, others foolish. A young Varelian named Kalen, barely into adulthood, stood near the back. He had always dreamed of traveling beyond the stars, but he had never seen a ship that could survive far from home. As the light disappeared, he whispered to his friend, "Do you think anyone will answer?" His friend shook his head. "Even if they do? Will they be in time?" Selka turned toward the people. Her voice was calm, but carried a quiet strength. The stars have heard us. Whether they answer or not, we will not face the darkness in silence. For days after, the beacon burned bright each night, sending its plea into the void. Farmers still worked their fields. Traders still sold goods in the market. But there was an unease beneath every smile, a shadow in every conversation. Children asked their parents about the Deathworlders, strange beings from the oldest stories. The tales said they came from planets filled with storms and fire, with beasts that hunted in the dark, and plants that could kill with a touch. It was said those who survived such worlds grew strong beyond imagining. But the stories also said they were dangerous. Kalen's grandmother told him, "If a Deathworlder hears our call, it will not be gentle help they bring. It will be hard, like stone. But sometimes, that is the help one needs." In the high watchtower above the port, sky watchers scanned the horizon every day, searching for the glint of approaching ships. They saw only the Draxion fleet, growing, larger as it drew closer. Elder Vorn came to Selka one morning. His face was pale. "Even if our call is answered," he said softly, "I fear they will not arrive before the Draxions." Selka looked out at the sea where silver waves met the endless sky. "Perhaps," she said, "but perhaps not. The stars hold many secrets, and sometimes they send what we do not expect." That night, the beacon's light burned stronger than before, as if the crystal itself believed someone was listening. Far, away, beyond systems the Varelians had never mapped, something stirred. In the darkness between the stars, small, fast ships altered their course, drawn by a faint signal pulsing across the void. The Varelians did not know it yet, but their plea had been heard, and the ones coming to answer it were not like the gentle allies of their stories. They were something else entirely. The days after the signal was sent felt longer than usual. The Varelians went about their lives, but the fear of the approaching Draxion fleet hung in the air like a storm cloud that refused to move. From the high watchtower above the city of Lyraven, the sky watchers kept constant watch. Their crystal scopes could see far into the upper atmosphere, and even beyond. Every morning they checked the skies, hoping for an answer to their plea. But each day the only change was the slow, steady approach of the Draxion warships. The Empire's fleet was like a wall of metal in space, black, sharp-edged, and moving with the cold precision of hunters closing in on prey. Kalen, the young Varelian who had stood at the back of the beacon ceremony, came to the watchtower often. Though he was not a trained sky watcher, they allowed him to help carry supplies and clean the crystal lenses. In return, he could look through the scope when things were quiet. One afternoon, as the suns dipped toward the horizon, Kalen peered into the scope. The Draxion ships were larger now, their forms blocking out small clusters of distant stars. But then, something else caught his eye. Far to the left of the Draxion fleet, faint metal shapes moved swiftly across the star field. They were small, much smaller than the Draxion cruisers, but they were fast. Faster than anything Kalen had seen before. "Elder Selka needs to see this," Kalen said quickly, stepping back from the scope. The senior sky watcher leaned over to look, his brow furrowed. "Not Draxion," he said after a pause. "Not Varelian. The shape is strange." Within an hour, the council elders gathered in the tower. Selka looked through the scope, adjusting the crystal focus until the small ships came into sharper view. They were dark-colored, with odd angular designs. Some had long wings, others were shaped like thick arrows. And they moved in a way that seemed alive, darting, weaving, never keeping the same course for long. "They travel together, but not in formation," Selka murmured. "Like a pack of hunters." Vorn stepped closer. "Could they be traitors?" "No. Traitor moves that fast," Selka replied. "And no traitor would fly so close to an Imperial fleet." The Skywatcher marked their course. If they keep this speed, they will pass near our world in less than 4 days. That night, the news spread quietly among the people. Some whispered in the markets, wondering if this was the answer to their plea. Others feared it might be another enemy, one the Draxions had not yet destroyed. Children asked about the old legends again, the ones about the Deathworlders. Most adults did not speak of them in detail. The Deathworlders were said to be from planets where storms could shatter mountains, where predators stalked even the brightest days, and where the air itself could turn against you. Only the strongest survived. But the old stories also said the Deathworlders had once fought alongside others in ancient wars, not for conquest, but for survival. Kalen's grandmother, hearing the rumors, told him, "If they are Deathworlders, they will not arrive with kind words or gentle hands. But they will stand against the Draxians if they choose to help us." On the second day, the strange ships had drawn closer. The Draxian fleet had also noticed them. Imperial ships began shifting their positions, as though preparing for interception. But the newcomers did not slow down. If anything, they moved faster. From the watchtower, Kalen could see their strange flight patterns. They did not fly in straight lines like the disciplined Draxion formations. Instead, they swirled, changed course sharply, and sometimes split apart before regrouping. "It is like watching birds of prey," one sky watcher remarked. On the third day, as the Varelians watched from their mountain cities, something unexpected happened. One of the smaller dark ships broke away from the group and moved ahead at incredible speed. Within hours, it entered the upper atmosphere of Scifi Prime. From the ground, it looked like a streak of silver fire cutting across the sky. People stopped in the streets to stare. The craft descended toward a flat plain outside Lyraven, slowing until it hovered above the grass. A deep hum filled the air. Then, with a hiss of pressure, the craft landed. A small group of Varelian guards, armed, only with ceremonial spears, stood at a safe distance. The ship's side opened, and a figure stepped out. It was not like any being the Varelians had seen. The figure wore armor made of dark plates, scratched and scorched as if from many battles. The helmet was smooth and faceless, with a narrow strip of black glass where the eyes might be. The being paused, scanning the area, then removed the helmet. Gasps rippled through the crowd that had gathered. The stranger's face was strange, but not frightening, skin marked with faint lines from sun and wind, eyes sharp and watchful. The features were strong, the expression calm, but alert. It was a human. The stranger stepped forward, speaking in a deep, steady voice. The words were not Varelian, but after a moment, a small device on their armor translated, "I am Captain Elena Rourke of the Terran Expeditionary Force. We received your signal." Selka, who had come from the city to meet the arrival, bowed slightly. "We are grateful," she said. "The Draxions are near and we have no means to stop them." Rourke glanced toward the sky, where the black shapes of the Draxion fleet could be seen faintly against the stars. Her expression did not change. "Where are they?" she asked simply. Her tone was not fearful, nor did it carry false comfort. It was the voice of someone who had faced storms before and survived. Behind her, the rest of the human ships were still on approach, moving fast. The Draxion fleet had begun to shift again, like predators sensing another predator nearby. For the first time in weeks, the Varelians felt something they had almost forgotten: hope. And for the first time, the Draxions might be facing an enemy they could not easily crush. The plain outside Lyraven was no longer quiet. The single human ship that had landed was now joined by 3 more, each one different in shape and size. Some were long and narrow, built for speed. Others were broad and heavy-looking, like moving fortresses. The Varelians stood at a distance, watching as humans in dark, rugged armor moved quickly around their ships. Their movements were sharp and efficient, as if they had done this hundreds of times before. They carried strange devices, tools, and long objects that were clearly weapons, though nothing like the ceremonial spears the Varelians used. Captain Elena Rourke stood near the landing ramp of her ship, speaking with Elder Selka. The translation device on her armor made her words clear in the Varelian tongue, but her tone carried weight even without it. "You say the Draxians will be here in 15 days, Rourke said. Selka nodded. "That is the time our watchers have calculated." Rourke's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then we will have less than 2 weeks to prepare. My people can work with that." Her confidence was strange to the Varelians. They had expected hesitation, perhaps even questions about whether the fight could be avoided. Instead, the humans spoke as if the outcome depended only on what she and her crew decided to do. "You do not fear them?" Selka asked, Rourke's mouth curved slightly, not a smile of amusement but one of understanding. "Fear is natural, but the Draxians can bleed. That is all we need to know." Kalen, who had been standing among the younger Varelians, could not stop himself from stepping forward. "You have fought them before?" Rourke looked at him for a moment. "Not the Draxians, but we have fought others like them, on worse ground, in worse odds," the Varelians murmured quietly to each other. Most could not imagine worse odds than facing the Empire's fleet. The humans wasted no time. Within hours of landing, they began unloading crates of equipment. Metal panels were set up in rows, strange towers were built on the plain, and small hovering drones scanned the surrounding land. "What are they doing?" Kalen whispered to Selka. "They are making ready," Selka replied, though her voice held uncertainty. Rourke noticed their curiosity and walked over. "These are perimeter defenses," she explained, pointing to the metal towers. "If the Draxians land troops here, these will make them regret it. And over there," she gestured toward the long, narrow devices being assembled. "Those are rail cannons. They'll make a hole in anything the Draxians send down." Kalen's eyes widened. "You came with weapons, not to hide, but to fight." Rourke nodded once. "Hiding only delays the inevitable. Better to make the fight, costly for them. Costly enough they never come back." That evening, the humans invited the Varelians to see the inside of their ships. The air inside smelled faintly of metal and oil. Panels glowed with maps and moving lights. The humans' quarters were small but neatly organized, clearly built. For function, not beauty. One wall displayed images of strange worlds, deserts of red sand, frozen plains under green skies, jungles so thick they seemed alive. Kalen realized these must be the death worlds humans came from. "Your home is one of these?" he asked Rourke. She pointed to an image of a blue and white world with swirling clouds. "Earth. Not the most dangerous place we've lived, but it taught us enough." "You have lived on worse worlds than your own?" Selka asked, surprised. Rourke's expression softened slightly. "We go where we must. Sometimes because of choice. Sometimes because the universe doesn't ask what we want." The next day, Rourke gathered her team and the Varelian Council in a cleared space on the plain. She had drawn lines and symbols in the dirt, a battle plan. "These are the most likely landing sites for the Draxions," she said, pointing to 3 points near the city. "We will reinforce each one with defenses and personnel. We'll need volunteers from your people, not to fight directly, but to move supplies, handle communications, and evacuate civilians if needed." Elder Vorn frowned. "Our people have never been part of war." Rourke's gaze was steady. "Then learn quickly. You don't have to be soldiers, but you do have to survive." Her words were not cruel, but they were sharp enough to silence any further argument. Over the next several days, a strange partnership began to form. The humans worked with relentless focus, building fortifications, calibrating weapons, and running drills. The Varelians learned to operate simple devices, to relay messages, and to spot enemy movements through binocular scopes. Kalen became something of a guide for the humans, showing them the terrain, the fastest paths between key points, and where fresh water could be found. In return, one of the human engineers taught him how to use a small pulse rifle. It was heavier than it looked, and its energy cell glowed faintly when charged. "This is for last resorts," the engineer told him. "But if you need it, aim steady and don't close your eyes." Meanwhile, Rourke sent 2 of her ships in too. The upper atmosphere, where they began shadowing the Draxian fleet from a distance. They kept just out of range, watching every movement. One evening, as the twin suns set, Selka walked with Rourke along the edge of the plain. "Your people, you live as if every day might be a battle," Selka said quietly. Rourke glanced at the horizon. "That's not far from the truth. On the worlds we come from, danger isn't rare, it's constant. If it isn't the ground shifting beneath your feet, it's the air trying to poison you. You learn to adapt, or you don't last long." Selka studied her. "And you came here, to fight for strangers." The human captain stopped walking. "No, one stays a stranger when they call for help. We heard you, and that was enough." Selka said nothing, but in her heart, she felt the first real spark of trust. By the 10th day after the humans' arrival, the plain outside Lyraven had transformed. Towers bristled with defensive weapons. Trenches and barriers marked choke points along likely invasion routes. Human patrols moved constantly, scanning for any sign of enemy approach. The Draxions were now close enough that their massive ships could be seen in the night sky without a scope, black shapes that blotted out the stars. Kalen stood on the watchtower, looking at them with a mix of fear and determination. Rourke joined him, her eyes fixed on the same sight. "They're almost here," Kalen said. "Yes," Rourke replied calmly. "And so are we." The Varelians had called for mercy. The humans had answered, not with soft promises, but with steel, fire, and the will to stand. And soon, the Draxians would learn what it meant to face Deathworlders. The night before the battle, Sarava Prime was silent. The markets had closed early. Families stayed indoors, speaking in low voices. High above the city of Lyraven, the black shapes of the Draxian warships hung in the sky like predators waiting for the right moment to strike. In the human camp on the plain, the silence was different. It was not the silence of fear, but of focus. Humans moved quietly between the towers and trenches they had built, checking weapons, loading supplies, and, speaking in short, clipped phrases, Captain Elena Rourke stood over a holographic display projected from her wrist device. The shifting blue light showed the city, the surrounding plains, and the red markers of possible enemy landing sites. Her lieutenant stood nearby, waiting for orders. "They'll hit us in 3 waves," Rourke said. "First, bombardment from orbit to soften defenses. Second, troop landers for ground assault. Third, heavy armor if the first 2 fail." One of the lieutenants, a tall man with short dark hair, nodded. "Same plan we've seen a dozen times before." Rourke glanced at him. "Yes, and the same mistake they've made a dozen times before. They think the ground is already theirs." Kalen stood at the edge of the meeting space, watching quietly. Though he was not part of the human crew, Rourke had allowed him to listen. He carried his pulse rifle slung across his back, and his hands were restless, tightening and loosening into fists. "You'll be in the city," Rourke told him. "Your job is to guide civilians to the safe zones and keep communications open. If we lose contact, use the signal flares." Kalen nodded, but he hesitated. "And if they break through?" Rourke's gaze was steady. "Then you run. Find another place to stand and fight again. You only lose when you stop moving." At dawn, the Draxions began their attack. The first strike came from the sky, a rain of burning projectiles that fell toward the human defenses. But before they could hit, the human rail cannons fired upward with a deep, thunderous sound. Slugs of dense metal tore through the incoming projectiles, exploding them in the air before they could reach the ground. From the watchtower in Lyravan, Varelian citizens watched with wide eyes. They had expected destruction, but instead they saw a shield of fire created by the humans. Then came the second wave, dozens of Draxion troop landers breaking through the clouds, black and sharp like the claws of some great beast. They dove. Toward the plane, engines screaming, Rourke's voice rang out over the comms. "Positions! Wait for my mark!" The landers came lower. Just as they began to slow for landing, Rourke gave the signal. Hidden panels in the plane burst open, revealing human missile pods. The missiles streaked upward in twisting arcs, striking the landers from below. Some exploded instantly, spinning. Out of control. Others managed to land, but their hulls were scarred and smoking. The survivors opened their ramps and Draxion soldiers poured out, tall, armored beings with insect-like helmets and glowing visors. They moved in disciplined lines, weapons ready. The humans didn't meet them head-on. Instead, they split into small squads, moving fast between cover points, striking at the Draxion's flanks, and then vanishing before the enemy could respond. From the city, Kalen could hear the battle, a deep, constant roar of weapons, mixed with sharp bursts of sound from the human rifles. He guided families into underground shelters, all the while listening to the comm updates. "They don't fight like we do," Elder Vorn said, standing beside him. "They vanish and return, over and over. They're not trying to hold the field," Kalen replied. "They're trying to make the enemy lose it." On the plane, Rourke moved with her squad, giving short, precise orders. "Squad 3, swing east, cut their supply crates. Squad 2, push them toward the trenches." The Draxians tried to regroup, but every time they formed a solid line, a human attack broke it apart. Explosions lit the air, smoke drifted low, across the grass, and the ground shook with the impact of heavy fire. At one point, a Draxion commander raised a large signal flag to rally his troops. A single human shot cracked through the noise, and the flag dropped. The enemy formation faltered. After 2 hours of fighting, the first wave of ground troops was broken. The surviving Draxians fell back toward their landers, some limping, others dragging injured comrades. The third wave began, a deep rumble from the sky as massive Draxion armor units descended. These were not landers, but walking war machines, each as tall as a Varelian building and bristling with weapons. Selka, watching from the city edge, felt her stomach tighten. "No defense can stop those," she murmured. But Rourke had been expecting them. "Bring the charges," she ordered. Humans on hoverbikes darted forward, weaving between the massive machines and planting small, blinking devices on their legs. Seconds later, coordinated explosions ripped through the joints, sending the giant walkers crashing to the ground. The Draxions still tried to push forward, but now their path was littered with wreckage. Human squads used the debris as cover, cutting down enemy troops who tried to advance. By midday, the plain was quiet, except for the low hum of human drones sweeping for survivors. Kalen came running from the city toward Rourke. His eyes were wide, not with fear but with amazement. "You drove them back," he said, breathless. Rourke wiped dust from her face. "No. We gave them a reason to rethink the cost of coming here. They'll be back." "But you won today," Kalen insisted. Rourke glanced at the horizon, where the black shapes of the retreating Draxion ships still floated in the distance. "Winning one day is easy. Making sure they never win. That's the hard part." Selka joined them, her voice calm but filled with respect. "You fought as if this world was your own." Rourke's reply was simple. "For now it is." The Varelians had seen many things that day, machines that could shatter enemy armor, weapons that could strike from incredible distances. But the greatest shock was the way the humans fought. Not for glory, not for dominance, but to ensure there would still be a tomorrow, and tomorrow the Draxians would have to decide whether they wanted to face Deathworlders again. The battle was over, but the plain outside Lyravin still carried the marks of war. The grass was blackened in long, scorched lines. Fragments of metal lay twisted and broken where the Draxian war machines had fallen. The scent of smoke hung in the air, carried on the mountain wind. The Varelians expected the humans to celebrate. Instead, Captain Eleanor Rourke and her crew began working immediately. There were no cheers, no parades, only the same calm focus they had shown before the battle. Human engineers moved between the wreckage, marking dangerous areas with bright flags. Drones lifted heavy debris, clearing paths toward the city. Others checked the power systems of the defensive towers, replacing damaged components so they would be ready again if needed. Elder Selka approached Rourke as she oversaw the repairs. "You fought for us," Selka said. "Surely you can rest, now." Rourke shook her head. "Rest comes when you're safe. You're not safe yet." Selka tilted her head. "The Draxians have retreated." "For now," Rourke replied. "But they'll be back. Maybe in weeks, maybe in months. And when they return, you can't wait for us to arrive again. You have to be ready to stand." Those words spread quickly among the Varelians, and they carried both weight and confusion. Their people had never trained for war. They built ships for the sea, not the stars. They used tools for farming, not for fighting. The next day, the humans began teaching. On the open plain, human soldiers stood in lines beside Varelian volunteers. Some were young, with curious eyes. Others were older, their hands steady but unsure. One human, named Sergeant Daniel, moved down the line, showing each Varelian how to hold a basic energy rifle. "Keep your feet apart, not together," he instructed. "You need balance. You're not standing still. You're part of the ground and ready to move." Kalen, standing near the front, adjusted his stance as Daniel had shown. The rifle felt heavy at first, but after a few moments it seemed more like an extension of his arms. From a distance, Selka watched. "You are turning our people into soldiers," she said quietly to Rourke. Rourke shook her head. "No, I'm turning them into survivors. Soldiers fight for orders. Survivors fight for their lives, their homes, their people. There's a difference." Training was not limited to weapons. In the city, human engineers showed Varelian builders how to reinforce structures with stronger materials, how to design barriers that could slow an advancing force, and how to repair damage quickly after an attack. Varelian healers learned, from human medics, how to stop bleeding with pressure, how to move the injured without causing further harm, how to work in the middle of chaos. Kalen's grandmother, who worked with herbs and natural remedies, watched as a human medic used a small portable scanner to locate a fracture in a young man's arm. "Our ways are slower," she admitted. The medic smiled. "Your ways still matter. Sometimes slow is what saves a life after we've done the fast work." After 3 days of training, the humans led joint drills. It began with a loud alarm that echoed across Lyravin. Varelians and humans moved into their positions, some to defensive towers, others to shelter routes. Rourke timed the entire drill. At the end, she walked through the city, speaking with each group. "Faster on the southern route," she told one team. "You held your ground well here," she told another. Kalen, flushed from running messages, asked her, "Why push us so hard?" "It's only practice." Rourke looked at him with the same steady eyes she always had. "Because when it's not practice, you won't have time to think. Your body will remember what you've done 100 times before. That's what will keep you alive." At night, when the drills were over, the humans didn't leave the Varelians to themselves. They helped repair damaged homes, brought out small water purification units for villages farther away, and shared preserved food from their supplies. The Varelians had expected warriors to arrive. They had not expected them to be builders, teachers, and healers as well. One evening, Selka joined Rourke on a hill overlooking the plain. The stars were bright above, and the wreckage from the battle was mostly cleared. "When you came," Selka said, "I thought mercy would mean you would shield us from danger. I thought it meant protection without cost." "And now?" Rourke asked. Selka gave a small smile. "Now I see it means something harder. You are giving us the means to protect ourselves." Rourke's voice was quiet, but firm. "We don't save people so they can stay afraid. We save them so they can stand." By the end of the week, the Varelians had changed. They still sang their morning songs to greet the suns. They still worked in the markets and sailed the silver blue seas. But now there was a sharper edge to their movements, a readiness in their posture. Kalen could walk through the city and see friends practicing with rifles in the courtyards, or groups running obstacle courses built from old shipping crates. Even, the children played differently, turning their running games into mock patrols, shouting orders as they dashed between buildings. On the 8th day after the battle, the humans received a long-range signal. The Draxians had moved out of Sarava, Prime's orbit, retreating toward the edge of the system. For now, the danger was gone. Some of the human ships would leave to answer other calls, but Rourke left a small team behind, enough to advise, to help train, to keep the defenses sharp. As the larger ships prepared to depart, the Varelians gathered at the star beacon once more. But this time they did not send a plea for help. Instead, they sent a message of thanks. The light shot into the sky, steady and strong. Selka stood beside Rourke as the beam rose. "If another world calls for aid," Selka said, "you will go to them as you came to us." Rourke nodded. "And now so will you." The elder looked at her in surprise. Rourke continued, "You're not helpless anymore. When someone sends their voice into the dark, you can be the answer." Selka smiled slowly. "Then perhaps mercy is not something given. It is something passed on." Rourke's eyes held the faintest glint of pride. "Now you understand. The Varelians had begged the stars for mercy. The Deathworlders had answered. But their gift was not soft shelter. It was steel in the heart, skill in the hands, and the courage to face the storm when it returned. And when the storm came again, Sarava Prime would not face it alone, nor in silence. Weeks had passed since the Draxians had been driven away. The plain outside Lyraven had healed. Green shoots pushed through the blackened ground. The smell of smoke had faded, replaced by the salt breeze from the silver-blue sea. But something deeper had changed. The Varelians no longer walked with the quiet, uncertain steps of a people waiting for rescue. Now they moved with purpose. Their eyes no longer searched the skies for salvation. They searched for opportunities. Kalen stood on the high cliffs, watching the human ship Dauntless prepare to leave orbit. Captain Rourke had spent the morning walking through the market, speaking with families, checking the new defensive towers, and meeting with the council. Selka joined Kalen, leaning on her carved walking staff. "The Deathworlders will leave soon," she said. Kalen nodded. "I thought I would feel afraid when this day came, but I'm not anymore. That is because you now understand what they gave us," Selka said. "It was not just protection. It was the knowledge to protect ourselves." They both turned as a long horn sounded from the harbor. The council had called for a gathering at the star beacon. Word spread quickly, and by the time the twin suns began to lower toward the horizon, the plaza was filled. Captain Rourke stood at the base of the great beacon tower. Behind her, the human crew stood in their dark armor, hands clasped behind their backs. Before her, the Varelian Council and hundreds of citizens waited in silence. Selka stepped forward. Her voice carried clear and steady. When danger came, we begged the stars for mercy. The Deathworlders heard us. They fought for us, bled for us, and taught us how to stand. She turned toward Rourke. Now we wish to give something in return. From the crowd, Kalen carried a carved box to the front. Inside was a silver medallion in the shape of the star beacon, with a single sapphire at its center. It gleamed. In the last light of the suns, this, Selka said, is the mark of the Starfire Pact. A promise that Scifi Prime will no longer be only a voice calling for help. We will be a voice answering the calls of others. Rourke accepted the medallion with both hands. She studied it for a moment, then looked back at Selka. This is a greater gift than you know. It means you're ready to be more than survivors. You're ready to be defenders. The beacon's crystal core began to glow. This time, its light would not be a cry for aid, it would be a declaration. Kalen stood at the control panel, his fingers moving over the switches he had learned to use from human engineers. "Ready," he called. Selka looked at Rourke. "Would you do the honor?" Rourke smiled slightly and pressed the activation key. The star beacon came alive. A pillar of pure white light shot into the darkening sky, bright enough to be seen from orbit. But unlike before, the light did not pulse in distress. It burned steady and proud. Far above, the Dauntless and the other human ships recorded the signal. It was coded not as a plea, but as an offer, an open channel to any world in need, telling them that Scifi Prime was ready to stand beside them. That night, the city was filled with music. The Varelians sang songs that mixed their old melodies with the steady drum beats the humans had taught them. Children ran through the streets with small paper lanterns shaped like stars. Kalen joined a group of trainees in a courtyard, where they practiced quick movements between cover points. Even during celebration, they kept their drills sharp. Sergeant Daniel watched with approval. "Good," he said. "You're making the moves without thinking now. That's how you survive." Kalen grinned. "We don't just survive now, Sergeant. We fight back." In the command room of the Dauntless, Rourke watched the beacon signal repeat across the network. "It's strong," her communications officer reported. "We're getting acknowledgments from 3 colonies and 1 trade station already." Rourke leaned back in her chair. "That's the beginning. Give it a year, and they'll be part of a network. Not a chain of the weak, but a circle of the willing." At dawn, the Dauntless prepared to leave. The humans and Varelians exchanged firm handshakes and quiet words. No one spoke of fear anymore, only of meeting again. Kalen approached Rourke one last time. "Captain," he said, "when I first saw your ship come down from the clouds, I thought you were here to save us." Rourke studied him for a moment. "And now?" "Now I think you came to make sure we could save ourselves," Kalen said. Rourke gave a short nod. "Then my job here is done." As the Dauntless rose into the sky, the star beacon shone again. This time it was joined by dozens of smaller lights, signal flares from the coastal towers and inland cities, each one a promise that the people of Scifi Prime were united. The Draxians might return someday, or some other threat might appear from the darkness between the stars. But when it happened, the Varelians would not hide. They would answer. In the weeks that followed, small Varelian scout ships began traveling farther from the planet than they ever had before. Some carried supplies to nearby colonies damaged by storms. Others brought home news of distant worlds and even carried messages of alliance. One of those messages arrived from a mining moon attacked by raiders. The Varelian Council debated for less than an hour before agreeing to send aid. When their ships left orbit, they carried not only food and medicine, but trained defenders ready to stand beside strangers in battle. The Starfire Pact was no longer just words, it was action. Months later, In a quiet moment on the Dauntless, Rourke received a transmission. The image was slightly distorted, but she recognized Kalen immediately. He was wearing light armor, a rifle slung over his shoulder. Behind him, she could see a dusty landscape and the shadow of a damaged settlement. "We've arrived," Kalen said. "The raiders are gone. We'll help rebuild before we head home. Just thought you should know. The pact works." Rourke felt the smallest smile on her face. "Understood," she replied. When the signal ended, she turned to her crew. "Another world that won't be alone anymore. That's how it's supposed to be." The Varelians had once begged the stars for mercy. The Deathworlders had come, and now, because of that meeting, a light traveled through the darkness, sometimes from humans, sometimes from Varelians, sometimes from others who had been taught. The same lesson: mercy is not the end of fear, it is the beginning of courage.